Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Jack Slack here. It's 4 p.m. on Saturday, and I'm recording the podcast on a Saturday because there's fuck all going on this weekend. No UFC event, no Bellator event, diddly squat. No Glory, no WSOF. There was a ONE FC event. Oh, maybe that was last weekend. Yeah, that was last weekend because there was that awesome choke. And then there was some whatever card that Mackenzie Dern was fighting on. Mackenzie Dern, absolute babe, fantastic grappler, tiny lass, but took on Gabby Garcia a few times, and really scrappy, but missed weight by like 3 pounds. So still getting to grips with the whole MMA thing. But she won by an omoplata rear naked choke, which is awesome. Don't often see those. Mainly because, well, frankly, getting stuck in omoplatas is quite rare. Guys normally jump over the top, so it's normally sort of a sweep by happenstance rather than a deliberate sweep. But this lass got stuck in the omoplata and she was just squirming around for ages, and then finally just reached up and choked her while she was in it. It was really cool. It was one of those ones where you almost worried about them wrecking their shoulder as the person let go of it. If you watch the really good grapplers like Big Nog and people like that, after they submit their opponent, they'll still be on. They'll be switched on, and they'll let the opponent out of the hold in such a way that it doesn't hurt them. Great example of that is Tim Sylvia versus Big Nog. He's guillotining him, and Sylvia's arm gets stuck in a weird way or something like that. And Sylvia taps out, and Nog immediately lifts up his hips, lets Tim Sylvia get out before he goes off celebrating. And that's really cool to see because, well, I mean, it's like Mark Hunt and the walkaway knockouts. When you've submitted that many guys, you know how to let them out of the submission fairly safely without getting caught up on each other and having that awkwardness or injuring them by accident. So what is going on in the MMA world this week? This is probably going to be a more newsy-based podcast. I'm going to be answering loads of questions too. We'll be doing some technical stuff later, some history stuff too. But I thought I'd get some news points up. Conor McGregor got fined $150,000 for the water bottle throwing incident. There are two ways to see this. The first way is to see it as, yeah, it was really stupid, and you don't really want everyone doing that. To be honest, I'm sort of torn about this, but I am partly in that side of it because I am so bored of the mandatory brawl at every weigh-in now. We don't have them so much at the UFC, but every boxing event has to have a brawl. Zab Judah got injured in his last one, which was hilarious. They had to call the fight off because he had a little argy-bargy at the weigh-in and someone got injured. It was either him or his opponent. But either way, they just screwed themselves out of thousands of dollars payday and months of hard work. But yeah, it gets kind of old when the two people come and have a stare down and then one of them shoves the other or they put their heads together. And when you're invested in it, it's quite exciting. But when it's just two guys you've never seen before, you're like, oh, what are you doing? This isn't getting me interested in your fight at all. At any rate, the water bottle and can throwing stuff was bollocks. Both camps deserved to be punished for that. But $150,000 is, well, firstly, it's a lot. But secondly, the amount of attention they got on that fight from that silly bollocks probably massively overshadows that $150,000. McGregor tweeted out, come and get it, or whatever it was. And now they're saying that McGregor doesn't even want to fight in Vegas anymore. I can't blame him, but they're not getting that Croke Park deal done anytime soon. There's so many obstructions in the way of that. Firstly, huge stadium. Secondly, they've got a curfew. They're not allowed to do it past a certain... Well, they're not allowed to do anything past a certain time. And as the recent UK event showed, you don't waste your big stars, or even your semi-big stars, on a European card on European time. You set it up so that they're fighting at 6 a.m. or whatever, and then you have people watch it live in the States. I mean, they were saying, Dana White was saying this, coming clean about this, back at like UFC 178 or whenever McGregor fought Poirier. He basically, they said, so not Croke Park next? And he basically had to say, yeah, that's probably never happening because of all these things. And because you lose, I think his figure was 25% on pay-per-view if you do it not at standard pay-per-view time. I suspect the Croke Park thing was just like the Dallas Cowboys Stadium thing, which is the UFC do this thing where if they're negotiating with the MGM, who they've done business with for a very long time, if they're negotiating with them, they'll start putting out the rumour that they're going to go to the Cowboys Stadium. And they put this rumour out almost always to Kevin Iole, who then publishes it. And then the MGM presumably gives them a discount or something. And nothing ever happens because of it. Because you're not going to fill out the Cowboys Stadium for an MMA event. Let's have a look at the size of that motherfucker. Oh, it's now the AT&T Stadium now, apparently. But I expect people probably still call it Cowboy Stadium. When I went to Manchester for one of the fight nights ages ago, I got in the cab and I said, I've got to be at this stadium. And I read out the name of it. And the guy was like, I've never even heard of it. So I had to look it up on my phone. And it turned out it was the MEN, the famous one. And he said, are they calling it that now? So they're always changing the names of these stadiums, but people always remember them as one thing. So the capacity of the Dallas Cowboys Stadium for a football game is apparently 80,000, but their record attendance for a football game is 105,121. Their record attendance for a boxing match is 51,420, which is a weird one because you'd think that you require much less space to do a boxing match. You only need a little hole in the middle where you put the ring, as opposed to an entire field. But those are numbers that, MMA events not going to touch. And even if they did, there would be no point booking out a stadium that size at that expense for that kind of event. The event in Australia did incredibly well, but that was the height of Rousey mania, and they don't go to Australia that often. I think even with the best card ever put together, the UFC would have a very hard time filling a stadium that big. Which makes those old Pride shows at the Saitama Super Arena look even more incredible when they had like 90,000 fans there or whatever it was. I think there was a Pride K1 crossover, but that's just an insane number of people. Can't even wrap your head around it. Yeah, the UFC record is 55,000 for either Shields, GSP, or the Ronda Rousey Holly Holm fight, which is the capacity for a boxing event at the Cowboy Stadium, but there just isn't enough money to justify doing that. Anyway, we got distracted there. So if McGregor only wanted to fight other places than Vegas, yeah, sure he could. I mean, he's probably... I mean, as much as it was... people shout on Dana White for saying that he's worth more to Vegas than Vegas is to him, he's probably right. He's a European star. If you he's the biggest star in MMA at the moment. If they took him anywhere in the world, he'd sell it out. If there's a good MMA following, of course. And... Nevada makes the money from actually sanctioning the fights and having them held. The UFC can go anywhere they want and not pay those commission fees. The UFC could easily do the Bellator thing and go to Indian casinos exclusively. So I don't think McGregor will be too hard done by, but I suspect we'll see him back at Vegas at some point. Pat Lundvall is just terrible. If you've seen her, she was the woman who wanted to ban Nick Diaz for life for marijuana, which they couldn't even prove that he took. We all know he did, but the proof was awful. It was 3 tests, and the one in the middle was the one that he was found to have marijuana cannabinoids. What are they called? I don't know. The one in the middle was the one he failed. The 2 either side of it, within a period that you wouldn't be able to shake the substance from your system, he passed. So firstly, it was the guy on Diaz's counsel, who was brilliant, said that it was medically impossible for him to do it. For that to happen. And then it turned out that the second one was the only one that was not anonymous and was unsealed or something like that. And Diaz had this great lawyer who came in and did it all, who laid it all out for everyone and made a fantastic case. And the commission were like, no, that's not how it works here. We just give you the punishment and you accept it. Yeah, athletic commission's generally terrible. Generally run by a friend of the governor, not someone who has any experience in the field, because how would you get experience in the field? But I laugh, but apparently we don't even have one in London, which is why Bellator came here. But there must be something, because David Hay and Derek Chisora had to fight under Icelandic Boxing Commission rules or something like that, when none of the major bodies would actually sign them to fight because of that stupid bottling incident, which was probably fake. Anyway, Conor McGregor will keep making money, the UFC will keep raking it in hand over fist, and... it's no biggie if they don't ever go back to Vegas, especially with this New York market opening. I would love it if New York becomes the new centre of MMA, because that was the fight capital of the world in the 40s, 50s, when the boxing was huge at the Garden. And because it's a lot easier for me to get to, and I would much rather spend a weekend in New York than in Las Vegas, to be honest. Other news, Ronda Rousey's coming back at 207, UFC 207, not the weight 207. Insert terrible joke about how she ballooned up in weight there. And then Cyborg was like, I suspect she's pregnant. And everyone was like, oh, that's interesting, Cyborg. Do you remember all that stuff you said about bullying, about body image? Yeah, women's MMA, so bitchy, man. Anyway, Nunes versus Rousey at UFC 207. People moaning about Rousey not deserving the shot. Yeah, she probably deserves the shot. I mean, she did defend the title numerous times. And everyone's talking about how strong the division's got now, but I think we're just in a post-Rousey world. Like, Nunes, people are saying that now she's just going to do the Holly Holm thing. I've not seen Nunes circle the ring particularly well. I've not seen her use ringcraft particularly well. I've seen her square up to people and throw powerful strikes, but that's exactly what everyone tried against Rousey, and everyone fell into the clinch doing it. Nunes has a brown belt in judo, but I've also seen her attempt to throw Valentina Shevchenko, who's tiny for the weight class, and Shevchenko threw her. So, I mean, I'm not going to count Nunes out, obviously, and Rousey could return in any kind of condition. Nunes could put on any type of fight, but people who are counting Rousey out are daft. It should be interesting to see her back. And I'm pleased for that because the fourth episode of Ringcraft was held up for fucking ages because of Ronda Rousey. So now she's back, maybe we'll be able to get that out. And then the other interesting announcement of the week, not really as high profile, which I quite enjoyed, was Doo-Ho Choi versus Swanson at UFC 206. Doo-Ho Choi has a rocket in his right hand. Just brilliant power and accuracy. And he throws both the cross counter, so over the opponent's jab, and the inside right, so he lines it up inside the opponent's jab. And he'll switch between the two as appropriate. And he just lays dudes out. He's incredible. And he looks like he's from a Korean boy band, so people love him. And Cub Swanson has always been one of my absolute favourite fighters in the world. Not always the most sharp or technical guy, but always scrappy and fun and creative. And, you know, he's one of those guys where you look at it and you go, that's martial art. What else happened this week? Conor McGregor was knocked out in sparring, but he wasn't, but he was, but he wasn't. Yeah, rumour flinging. I mean, I'm not going to rag on any MMA journalist. I didn't even see who posted this, but like, it was one of those things where someone posted it and then it turned out not to be true, or they didn't confirm it before they posted it, or something like that. And to be fair, if you were Conor McGregor's camp, you would be denying this. But they've put up tons of photos of him since. His nose doesn't look very broken, as it was said to be. Just reminds me of when, I can't remember which website it was, might have been MSN. They allowed people to just type in their own headline, submit news, and it would immediately go up on the news feed. And some kid said that Steve Jobs had died long before Steve Jobs actually died, and Apple stocks tanked for like a couple of hours before people realised. I mean, I'm not in the business of breaking news because anything that I am told is by friends, and I don't want to drop anyone in it. And also, I just don't have the means to check all these rumours with two people. It's a hard job breaking news, and I have tremendous respect for guys like Ariel Helwani who can do it consistently and always hold off until they know they've got the facts. There is like a growing movement of people who are sort of insiders and will just fling out rumours every which way. And sometimes those are valuable, but I think it's not so much their fault as people taking things at face value without a grain of salt. I understand that when someone like that is reporting something, it's a rumour. You know, you can't be making major decisions around it. What else happened? On Reddit, it was 2 years since Gina Carano almost came back. I don't think it was. It was 2 years since Gina Carano openly went into negotiations with the UFC, got on the front pages of every MMA publication, and then her DVD came out in the blood. She played the UFC very nicely for that one. She probably wasn't ever coming back, and I don't think she will be. As long as she's stunning and still getting acting roles, she'll keep taking the acting roles. And I can't blame her, because there's good money in that. And she is actually getting better as an actor. I really enjoyed her in Deadpool. She's looking big in that, though. You forget how big she was, because that was the 145-pound division was created as the Gina Carano show. And she was missing weight in that division. So she's almost cyborg size, basically. And then the other things in the rumour mill this week were the talk of a GSP comeback, but he wants like $5 million, and the UFC's probably not going to give it to him. I feel like the UFC should probably just throw money at this stuff at the moment. I mean, yes, they did just, the new owners did just buy it for $4 billion or whatever it was, but things are going so well with McGregor, you've got Rousey coming back, I think it would be worth investing in just, getting as many superstars in the bag as possible so that it is the UFC and it's not just the McGregor show. Because if McGregor has, a particularly crushing loss or a couple of losses back to back, or God forbid some terrible injury or retires, you want to be able to keep pushing out events with good attendances and good buy rates. So having GSP on the cards would never be a bad idea, and as much money as that is, it's probably they'll make more from the event. As long as they're making more from the event than they're paying GSP, should be all right. Anyway, fuck all else going on this week, so what I'm going to do is answer some questions. Hi Jack, Eddie Bravo recently talked about select EBI, Eddie Bravo Invitational, tournaments including open palm striking. First off, are you excited to watch these type of events? You have mentioned being a Bas Rutten fan, and this seems to be pretty similar to the Pancrase rule set when the fighters are on the ground, except for the goofy boots and rope escapes. Also, how do you feel this will affect the quality of the event from a grappling standpoint? I think it could lead to less risky techniques and more emphasis on top control in the position. I think this could be looked at as a positive from a self-defense perspective, but could also take away some of the more exciting techniques and transitions that we see at normal events. Sorry for the lengthy question. Always a fan of your work, and thank you for looking over my question. That's from Brent. Steady on with dissing rope breaks. Rope breaks are awesome. I actually really did enjoy rope breaks. The only problem with rope breaks is that they work well in sort of an exhibition context when you're grappling with your friends, but they don't work so well if the guy gets a heel hook and you grab the rope, and before the referee says stop, the guy cranks it as hard as he can. They don't really work as escapes, even when the referee's trying to make them work as escapes. And boots, I can live without the boots. They were a bit S&M. Anyway, I think this guy, Brent, I think Brent hit the nail on the head there. Probably, if guys can palm strike well, because we could just be dealing with, as Jeff Lacey said, a bunch of slappers. But, there's a difference between palm striking and slapping. And slapping can be really fucking painful. If you're using the whole hand over the ear, as Sakuraba and Shinya Aoki used to do to open up opponents on the ground, that can be awful. But if you're just slapping like slap boxing, probably not going to do any damage. It'll make the mount a more interesting place because getting people's elbows up is always the hard part. If you watch guys get mount in the EBI normally, firstly, if they're against anyone from the Danaher Death Squad, they normally don't want mount because they'll just buck you off and get the Ashigarami, single leg X, heel hook, whatever position you want to call it. But guys who get mount, they tend to just get their leg ensnared because the opponent keeps them low in the mount and moves them back with the elbow escape. Whereas if the guy is actually forced to raise his hands by slaps or palm strikes, it's a lot easier to get higher on his body without the elbows getting in the way and avoid being pushed back into guard. Regarding the self-defense stuff, I mean, I have so little time for anyone who's like self-defense this, self-defense that, because there is... Ryan Hall has a fantastic rant about this on YouTube. And we've all seen the video. Well, if you haven't seen the video of it, Ryan Hall getting accosted by some knobhead in a restaurant. And they go outside, and Ryan Hall just very slowly takes him down and gets on top of him. It's like, you don't want to do this. If you're training... Ryan Hall's point was, if you're training with a wrestler or a judo player or a jiu-jitsu guy, and you're trying your absolute best to not show any openings and do everything technically, when you start doing it against some random guy who's swinging at you, you're going to be much better off. And the whole jiu-jitsu for self-defense thing is very vague anyway, because the way that they tried to prove that every fight goes to the ground was by having one-on-one fights when everyone else wasn't allowed to get involved, and then dragging the guy to the ground. Yes, a one-on-one fight with a degree of rules and agreement will go to the ground, but self-defense isn't always that. Self-defense is... I'm starting to sound like one of those dudes, which I hate, but self-defense is like the guy could have a bottle or a knife, and he'll have friends, and you'll have friends. Or maybe some guy who you pissed off earlier in the night will see that you're in a fight and come over and help the other guy. Self-defense is fucking vague, and, the only reliable self-defense is road work. Practice your running. And it annoys me even more when guys are talking about self-defense and traditional Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and talking about the Helio filter and Helio and all that. And Helio Gracie, if you've seen him in those grappling matches or challenge matches, he'd sit in closed guard looking for cross chokes forever. The idea that he had this super practical self-defensive jiu-jitsu is bizarre. 90-minute fights with gis, not the self-defense that you probably want to train for. Rant about self-defense over. I think it'll be interesting. I don't know if it'll work out as well as Eddie Bravo thinks it will. I mean, he wanted to do this since back when he was doing combat jiu-jitsu. I think people are really starting to get into grappling for what grappling is, because we all appreciate it now, because we've come through MMA. A lot of us train grappling, but even MMA fans who don't grapple are interested in this stuff. And it's exciting because you get to see attacks that you don't see so often from, MMA fighters, because they don't spend all day, every day working on their grappling. They have to move into the striking and stuff like that. Yeah, I think we'll see a lot more guys sitting in the top of guard trying to slap fight. But I don't know if you can do that very well without elbows or punching. It'll be interesting to see. And frankly, I think that what will happen is a lot of... Either the Danaher guys will use this as a very slow transition into MMA, because they've been trying to get Gary Tonin into MMA forever, people have. Or the top guys in EBI won't compete in the slapping events, and we'll see just the lower down guys getting the wins in the slapping events, and the normal events will still be dominated by the Danaher crew. Hi Jack, question I've wondered about. Your opinion on hand position for hooks. There's thumb up, thumb horizontal, even the Russian hook with the thumb pointing to the floor. I've been taught the thumb up and horizontal versions by different teachers in the past. Is there a right or wrong here? Or simply different punches for different situations? If so, what situation might work for each variant? Thanks, from Jeff. Yeah, people used to rag on me for writing about Russian hooks, which was a name that I used just because you tend to see Eastern Bloc fighters doing this more than American fighters. The hook down, like you're looking at your wristwatch. Thumb down, sorry, hook. Yeah, Gennady Golovkin did it, Igor Vovchanchin did it, Fedor Emelianenko did it. What it can mean is that it's easier to hit with the actual hitting knuckles, what you would normally. If you do a palm facing you hook, the further away it gets from you, the more you're going to connect with your door knocking knuckles. Whereas if you turn your fist over, you can reach out a little bit further and still connect with the knuckles that you want to connect with. The problem is that if you connect with just those knuckles instead of the whole face of the fist, you've got a much higher chance of breaking those knuckles. And Fedor had all kinds of hand problems. Igor Vovchanchin has steel plates in his forearms. It can be quite dangerous. Not so much in big gloves. If you watch Golovkin, he loves the thumb down, or even, the thumb horizontal or even thumb down hook to the body. He'll throw that really wide. It's a really weird looking punch, but it lands, and it's Golovkin, so it normally hurts. But Golovkin uses all kinds of hooks. He uses thumb down, thumb in, thumb upwards. I mean, what I've always done is just try and find the most comfortable position that I can brace my wrist in, because the difficulty, especially if you're just on the bag or training for self-defense, going to say that again, but if you're on the bag and you don't have your hands wrapped particularly well, keeping your wrist straight is the important part. Lots and lots of boxers, when they get into street fights, break their wrists or injure their wrists because they're used to having them wrapped up. I find that thumb towards you, palm down, is easier for me to lock the wrist in position, just keep it all sturdy. That was the one that Dempsey liked. Palm towards me, I always feel like I'm sort of slapping, and I wouldn't like to do it without the big gloves on. Thumb down always feels more like the karate thing, the furi uchi, the whip strike, which is cool in its own right, but But then you're starting to connect with, what Dempsey would call an impure punch. You're connecting with the arm sort of straight and swinging, rather than bent at the elbow 90 degrees, slamming into the side of the head, sturdy. Really, a lot of it is up to your personal preference. A hook is not just a hook. A hook is not a hook is not a hook. They are very different. You only need to watch Roy Jones for that. He hooks from long range, short range. He'll slap hook and he'll land the full body rotation hooks. And that's the whole boxing game in a nutshell. There are only... some coaches teach that there are only 4 punches: jab, straight, lead hook, rear uppercut. If you add in the rear hook and the lead uppercut, which are less, they're more infighting weapons, generally less useful at range. But there's still only 6 or 7 punches. It's all about dynamic cadence, context. You can do different things with your hands, making the same sort of motions. Yeah, but be careful with the Russian hooks because you can mess your hands up quite easily with those. And I'd say be careful with palm facing your hooks because I always feel like I'm going to mess up my knuckles doing that. So there you go. Without even meaning to, I have picked my preferred type of hook. It's palm down. Good afternoon, Mr. Slack. I am a big fan of the Fights Gone By podcast. I find your work the most comprehensive and professional analysis on MMA, boxing, combat sports around. Don't know about professional, I swear quite a lot. As per your request, I tend to agree that a history lesson or two would be a great idea in the next podcast. I have heard you speak on many boxers that you admire. Perhaps a topic discussing a few of your favourites and their careers would gain some interest from your viewership, as we are between fight cards in the next few weeks. I have heard you speak of Jersey Joe Walcott several times, but I must admit I do not know the story very well. If not him, perhaps Marciano or Dempsey could work to spotlight their accomplishments and contributions to the sport of boxing. Keep up your great work, sir. Enjoy your Tuesday. That's from Dan. Yes, Jersey Joe Walcott is one of my all-time favourite fighters. If you haven't read what I consider my best article, it was called Jersey Joe Walcott, Art on the Ring Canvas. The alternative title was The Tragic Life of Arnold Cream, because Jersey Joe Walcott's real name was Arnold Cream, and he was a really promising young amateur and young professional. In fact, he went and trained with Joe Louis when Joe Louis was being groomed, and he knocked him down in a sparring session and was sacked almost immediately. And that became a huge thing in their rivalry. Walcott was a devoutly religious man, ended up having a lot of children, had to support those children, couldn't do it through boxing, so he boxed really erratically. His record's all over the place. Sometimes he's kind of like Charlie Burley. He'd go from the factory he was working at straight to the fight, and he'd be starving, and he'd just look a mess some nights and look amazing other nights. So it wasn't until very late in his career that he really got a chance. He fought Joe Louis, and their first fight, most people reckoned that Walcott deserved to win because he floored Louis a couple of times and just really looked fantastic. Their second fight, actually, I thought he looked even better. That was the one where he's using all the stance shifts and goofiness and looked supremely confident. But that was the one where Louis actually knocked him out, didn't go to the decision. And that was sort of the end of their rivalry. But it wasn't the end of the Joe Walcott story. Walcott came back later, fought Ezard Charles, who a lot of guys rate as one of the best ever. I think I heard Conor Rebush call him one of his top 5 ever this week. Ezard Charles, very good boxer, and Walcott had a couple of fights with him, mixed results, and then in the third fight he slips this punch and launches a lead uppercut as a counter, which turns Ezard Charles' head all the way around, and he just falls to the mat as Walcott pivots off. I think it's the most beautiful punch ever. Other people like the Ray Robinson one more. But yeah, Walcott was tremendous. He did all sorts of weird little things, like he'd pull his lead foot back towards his rear foot while turning his back on the guy, and then step his rear foot out behind as they came in so that he could lean well away from any punch they threw and then come back with the right hand. And that's how he caught Louis so many times. Caught Ezard Charles a few times with that. He did all sorts of other goofy stuff, like, switching stances, stepping across himself, Emmanuel Newton style stuff, stepping across yourself. Lost the world title to Rocky Marciano in a fight where he pounded Marciano for 12 rounds. I think it was the 13th round, Marciano knocks him out with one clean punch. And the interesting thing about that, of course, is that we don't have 15-round fights nowadays. Had that been a modern fight, Marciano wouldn't have ever got the championship. He'd have lost a 12-round decision by whooping. And then in the rematch, Marciano knocked out Walcott in the very first round, like one of the first good punches thrown. And it was really a strange fight. A lot of people think that Walcott just took the money and ran because he never fought again. And at the end of my article, there's sort of a wistful note about maybe that would be the best outcome. If that's, this guy worked his whole life desperately trying to get a shot and was never given the chance to really pursue the thing he was best at because he had to work in a factory and feed his kids and stuff. Yet, one of the most interesting boxers ever. Fantastic left hook that he used to disguise as a jab, which you just throw in behind the opponent's parrying hand. Brilliant defensive skills. He used to, in the Marciano fight, he goes to the ropes and he's just reverse shoulder rolling and taking everything Marciano is giving him. And that was also a fight that just showed, firstly, the heart of Marciano, but also his power. Walcott was taking the shots on his shoulders and stuff, and he was still getting tired and taking a pounding from it. One of my other favourites is, of course, Roberto Duran, mainly for all the stuff he achieved in his career, just insane number of moves up in weight, and the thing is that most people, well, I mean, a lot of people had heard about Duran before the Ray Leonard fight. He had the fantastic fights at lightweight, Esteban de Jesus. In fact, when most people in America got to know him, it was in that Ray Leonard fight, and that was after his 10 years at lightweight, or whatever it was, being the best lightweight, well, one of the best lightweights ever. So that was considered like him leaving his prime, and that was the night he beat Ray Leonard. Obviously came up short against Hagler in a great fight, got knocked out by Tommy Hearns, lost to Ray Leonard in the rematch by way of frustration. There was a third match at any rate that no one really cares about. But then he also fought guys like Iran Barkley, who was just enormous. Iran Barkley dwarfed James Toney when James Toney was a middleweight. So that's how big we're talking against a guy who used to be a lightweight. I think he was the first man to drop Iran Barkley. Took the title off Davey Moore, which is a great fight for sort of young athletic talent, but against old gritty experience. And he cheats a ton in that fight. He's winning on pure boxing alone, and he's still hitting the guy low, giving him the odd elbow, and I think he thumbed his eye at one point. Yeah. He could fight kind of dirty. He was machismo embodied. He was just all about the fight. But everything you hear about him for what he's done with for the people in Panama and stuff like that, he sounds like an absolutely terrific guy. There's a film coming out about him, which I don't expect will be good, but I'll probably go and watch it anyway. One of my favourite little moments of Roberto Duran isn't one of his fights. It's a sparring session, like a playful sparring session with Nigel Benn, the great British middleweight. Ben's sort of letting off his combinations against Duran, and Duran's in the headgear and just sort of rolling with the shots, doing whatever. And as Ben steps around him, Duran steps into a southpaw stance so that his right foot is just hooked behind Ben's lead leg. And he just sort of picks it up and trips Ben over. It was really cool, just this old-timer showing you little dirty things that you could do were you that way inclined. Because Nigel Benn was a ferocious fighter, terrific specimen, but Duran was one of those ones who had all the rounds. You see guys like Emmanuel Augustus, obviously the guys like Mayweather and people like that, James Toney, who are just so comfortable with the act of fighting. They've got it down to the most economical way to do it. And then there are guys like Nigel Benn, who very rarely sparred, only really hit mitts up until weeks of the fight, and then within weeks of the fight. And then he'd do his sparring and stuff like that. Because no one really has the perfect... no one's decided what the best method to train a boxer is yet. There are guys who spar all the time. There are guys who only spar when they've got a fight coming up. There are guys who only do the mitts. There are guys who don't do any mitts at all. James Toney famously wouldn't do anything except spar. They'd try and send him out for road work and he just wouldn't. But yeah, Duran was one of those guys who was just so comfortable under fire. He'd just throw out his jab. He'd know something was coming back and he'd move out of the way and throw his counterpunch. And he could fight by feel in the infight beautifully. He'd just set his hands up where he wanted them, and then as soon as he felt the other guy swinging, he'd be ducking under, just missing by a couple of inches, and then he'd be coming back with his counters. If you're at a loose end, which you are this week because there's no fights on, just watch through Duran's career. He had so many fights you're not going to be able to pull it off, but watch some of his best because he was absolutely astonishing. A terrific talent and sounds like a great dude. He's a fighter's fighter too. If you ask guys like Ricky Hatton or people like that who their favourite fighter was, rather than Ray Leonard, they'll normally say people like Roberto Duran. There's a great limerick about him, but I can't remember it off the top of my head, so I won't recite it here. There once was a man named Enos. I do love a dirty limerick, but that's not the Roberto Duran one. Anyway, if you want more history stuff, feel free to sign up to the Patreon, and there is a bonus history episode waiting for you there, which is 40-something minutes of me talking about Jack Broughton and James Figg, the first champions of London, and the bare-knuckle game and all that sort of stuff. And a bit about Pierce Egan, who was considered one of the greats of fight writing, but obviously pales in comparison to me. Yeah, okay, don't take that too seriously. Hey Jack, huge fan of the podcast since it came out. Just wondering, how do you think 5 3-minute rounds for a regular fight and 8 or 9 rounds for championship fights in MMA would look like compared to the standard 5-minute rounds, or 5 5-minute rounds for championship fights. What about a 15-minute round and a 25-minute round, respectively? Thanks, and keep up the great work. Yeah, it's a tricky situation because the shorter the rounds, the more... Well, look at it this way. You can win a round with 2 minutes of top control at present. If you consider like the usual sort of maybe minute of circling between strikes that happens, and if nothing really good happens on the feet in those periods of activity, then the 2 minutes on the ground that the guys on top will win in that round on the decision. 10-9 rounds standard. So that's where we are in MMA. There's this difficult thing where if you get a takedown and you hold for about 30-40% of the round, you've won that round. Now, if you made it 3-minute rounds, you give the guy on the bottom no time to work, basically. And you give him no time to get back to the feet. And if he does get back to the feet, he could have spent most of the round getting up. Just the shorter you make the rounds, the more guys can just get tied down in the clinch and the groundwork statically. It's great to have 5 minutes of grappling, but it's not always great to have 5 minutes of static grappling where they're just holding the clinch or something like that. Even in 8 or 9 rounds, basically what you'd be doing is competing to the first throw, like judo, with a minute rest in between. What about 15-minute round or a 20-minute round? I'm going to assume not a 15-minute round, then a 25-minute round. That would be absolutely nuts. I'm assuming you mean 15-minute round for the whole fight for most people, and then 25 minutes for main events. Again, with where a shorter round encourages a guy to get top position and hold it briefly, 15, 25-minute rounds, you're moving into old school UFC territory. If you've watched the super fight between Ken Shamrock and Royce Gracie, number 2, that is, as opposed to the brilliant one that Bellator hosted last year, if you give guys a long time limit, they tend to try and reserve themselves. They save it all up, and you get these very boring, stalling exchanges. I think 5 minutes is a good amount of time to work. I mean, 5 to 7, maybe. 7 is getting a bit long. The 10-minute rounds in Pride, people remember them very fondly, but they did tend to drag at the end. And also, everyone was roiding. Well, not everyone was roiding, but they were given free rein over their steroids. So if they weren't taking them, they were dumb. Yeah, I've always been in favour of just adding more 5-minute rounds. I mean, it does make it grueling, but I would love to see every main card fight 5-minute rounds, and then for a title fight, not a main event, just a title fight, 7 5-minute rounds. And, that would be absolutely grueling, but I still think it is the sort of distance where the last 2 rounds are going to be all heart, but we're not dealing with long stalling contests or short point-scoring contests. But, I think for the moment, 5-minute rounds will do. They seem to be working out okay. Hey Jack, what are some of your favourite movies about boxing, martial arts and or combat sports in general? That's from Jojo. I'm going to assume that's Joanne Calderwood, because she is a big Slack fan. No, she's one of my girls. Ong Bak, on the subject of Jojo, Ong Bak is an awesome film. That's one of the best martial arts films ever made. The action, it's so good. There's no wire work. The story's not bad, especially compared to the later Tony Jaa movies. And it's gymnastics and Muay Thai. I mean, what else could you want? I think I wrote an article about the techniques in Ong Bak, which was quite fun to write. Yeah, really, really good film. Any early Jackie Chan is absolutely brilliant. Police Story. The whole bit where he slides down the Christmas lights or whatever they are, giving himself like 3rd-degree burns, and then stands up at the bottom and runs off. Brilliant. What's that one where I can't remember the name of it, but the one where he's on stilts and a guy like shouts at him from a balcony and he round kicks the guy on the balcony with the stilts. It's brilliant. My favourite anything martial arts film is Jackie Chan's outtakes. If you just go through those on YouTube, they're amazing. Absolutely horrifying, but amazing. Like, the guy's broken every bone in his body. Rush Hour is, of course, brilliant. Apparently, Jackie Chan doesn't like Rush Hour, which is sad, but it's great. It's a great series of films, even though Chris Tucker is unbearable. he pairs really well with Jackie Chan. I just love those outtakes where it takes him about 4 takes to do something because he'll go, "Kick the door in, Jackie," and Jackie Chan will kick the door in and go, "My name's Lee," and like they keep reshooting it, and then he can't remember the lines he has like one line of Chinese to say at the end of the film in like he's learned Chinese moment, and he can't say it. Oh, that's such a good. Sorry, I'm just telling you about Rush Hour now. It's such a good film. I used to like a film called Iron Monkey, which has a ton of wire work in. But I just really enjoyed it. I think that might have been young Donnie Yen. I can't remember. Anything with Donnie Yen in is fantastic. He was in Ip Man. I haven't seen Ip Man 2. Need to go watch that. I'm still of the opinion that one of the best martial arts films ever is Enter the Dragon. And I think a lot of that has to do with the restrained use of Bruce Lee. Everyone else's fighting in it is shit. It's harsh but true. But just the way his stunt team worked with him, because he had a great stunt team. I mean, Jackie Chan was on it, obviously. But the way he could sell the strikes and get the other guys to sell the strikes just looked really good compared to a lot of even the best sort of kung fu stuff coming out of Hong Kong nowadays. And he hated wire work. And God, they've just brought out a new movie about him, which is apparently full of wire work. It's about him and Wong Man Jack. Is that his name? I'm going to call him that for now. And if I'm wrong, feel free to comment. Oh, no, it's Wong Jack Man. Yes. Wong Man Jack. I got the Wong Man. Wong Jack Man. The new film is about the famous challenge fight between Bruce Lee and Wong Jack Man. And in the trailers, it just looks like garbage wire work. And I think the way that they should have done that, if someone threw some money at me and said, "Hey Jack, make a film about Bruce Lee's life centered around the fight with Wong Jack Man, and also mainly with a white protagonist." I mean, I don't get involved in all that Hollywood whitewashing stuff, but it was quite telling that this film about Bruce Lee is entirely through the eyes of someone else who's white and American. Should have got Emma Stone to play her. Yeah, the way to do it would be, Bruce Lee said himself in interviews, he was like, on screen I can do this and this and this, but real fights are ugly and they're like this, ooh, and he'd do like the rapid fire punches and stuff. And I think it would have been really interesting if you did the Bruce Lee stuff all through the movie. He's showing the techniques in classes, or he's filming fight scenes and he's doing all the flashy stuff, and then the fight is just an ugly brawl. I think that would have been a brilliant way to do it, and it would have also respected his teachings, and his philosophies on fighting. And instead, you just got Drek. The reviews have been awful for it. Someone said to me on Twitter, "I hope it's historically accurate and has that fight with the ghost at the end." Which, if you saw the other Bruce Lee biopic, it's just fucking Drek. Oh my god. Bruce Lee's name has been, it's just... I hope when I'm dead, no one sells all my intellectual property rights and people make shit out of it. Right, I've prattled on for 40 minutes about the news and answered some questions, and I'm sorry, I'm still... weeping from laughing at that awful Bruce Lee biopic, and the bit where he fights the sailors at the dance. Yeah, sorry there's not a lot going on this week. I'd apologise, but I'm not responsible for when the fight companies hold their fights. If I were, they'd all be midweek affairs. We got some Bellator fights coming up soon. Maybe next week we'll look at, I'll go into detail on some of Liam McGeary's stuff because he's awesome. His escapes from the bottom and his reverse triangles and shit like that, just terrific. Very reminiscent of Braulio Estima himself, actually. Obviously, we're ramping up towards Alvarez versus McGregor. I'm doing a big thing on that, so I don't want to give too much away too early, but I'll try and do another big episode like I did with the very first episode where we were talking Diaz-McGregor, if only because it got thousands and thousands of hits. We've got Chandler versus Bendo coming up, which is another great fight. I've wanted to see that one for a while, before they did all the Koreshkov stuff and all that nonsense. Michael Page is fighting sort of a step up in competition, but the guy is like a foot shorter than him. And Koreshkov and Lima are fighting, which is a really good fight. That might be my underrated fight of the year in terms of on-paper matchup, because a lot of people remember Phil Davies from the UFC. Or they know Liam McGeary because he submitted Tito Ortiz. But Koreshkov is still one of the best kept secrets in MMA, despite being Bellator's champion. And Lima looked absolutely astonishing versus Paul Daly, and he's had some really good fights in the past. So I'm really looking forward to those Bellator events coming up. And we got Rafael dos Anjos versus El Kakui, Tony Ferguson. So that'll be a really good one. It'll be really exciting to see how much classic Tony Ferguson stuff he can get away with against a guy who is all pressure and doesn't let you make any mistakes. Tons and tons of good stuff coming up. Can't wait to talk about it. So remember, bonus episodes if you subscribe to the Patreon and become a Patreon boy. Subscribe to the YouTube because I never know when I'm putting these out, so it's always helpful to have that pop up and tell you. And send your emails to fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. I'm Jack Slack. It's been a pleasure as always, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.